Let's hear this morning's scripture for this second Sunday in the season of Lent. It is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, 31 through 35. Just then, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said, "You need to get out of town and fast. Herod is trying to kill you." Jesus replied, "Go tell that fox, today and tomorrow I'll be casting out devils and healing people, and on the third day I'll reach my goal. Even with that, I'll need to continue on my journey today, tomorrow, and the day after that, since no prophet can be allowed to die anywhere except in Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you. How often have I wanted to gather your children together as a mother bird collects her babies under her wings. Yet you refuse me. So take note. Your house will be left to you desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of our God.'" Amen.
Thank you for that scripture reading, Jane. Growing up, when I would tell my mom something mean that someone said to me at school, she would first respond out of care, making sure that I was okay. And then she would often say something like, "I wonder what their story is. I wonder what may be going on beneath the surface. What's going on outside of school?" And as a child, I don't think I really understood what she was saying or why she was saying this. But as an adult, I've come to really appreciate that she did say this, because it taught me that each and every one of us carries a story. We carry wounding, ego, pain, fear, and trauma within us. And yet, so often we can get boiled down to the one thing that people see about us, the one action. What I think my mom was reminding me of was that bullies at school are human too. And that we can never see or know everything happening in someone else's life. That's not to say that their actions are okay, but she was inviting me to see them as whole people. And it helps me in moments when I react out of ways that don't portray the best of me. And I can take a step back and realize I reacted strongly in that moment because I had just heard some bad news. Or as someone with often back pain, sometimes that takes over and I'm not as gracious as I would like to be. Those are glimpses of my underneath the surface stories. And we each carry these stories within us that shape who we are. Our theme in our Lent series this week is moving from fear to compassion. And sometimes this moving to compassion means remembering that we don't know the stories that each of us holds. We don't always get the full picture of a person or what is happening in their lives. And I have been especially trying to remember this lately as I read about proposed bills coming out of our state capitol, or the ways that one man's decision and actions are killing and hurting so many people. What are the stories we aren't seeing? How can we be invited to remember their humanity as well? In the gospel story, I realize Jesus is doing what I have been struggling to do lately. In these short verses, we heard Jesus is doing something remarkable, and quite honestly, something that feels so needed in our world today, and so challenging to strike the right balance. Jesus is very clearly naming the harm of what those in power are doing. He isn't being numb or paralyzed by fear, and he's saying what is happening is not okay, and yet, within all of that, he continues to respond out of compassion. Jesus acknowledges the fear, acknowledges the powers of the day and calls them out, and then he moves into compassion, to this motherly nurturing and care. And I wonder if he was doing a bit of what my mom said to me, reminding himself and all of us that there is more going on underneath the surface. In the first part of these verses, we hear Jesus respond to the Pharisees who are warning him, "Get out of town, your life is threatened, Herod is going to kill you." To which Jesus responds by calling Herod a fox and saying, "I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I will not be silenced by the powers that be. I refuse to live from a place of fear." Jesus acknowledges that fear, acknowledges the reality of the threat, and then continues to live and seek God's ways, to speak truth to power by not being silenced by fear or threat. And then the tone shifts in the verses as Jesus turns to saying, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and you stone those who are sent to you. How often have I wanted to gather your children together as a mother bird collects her babies under her wings. Yet you refuse me." Jesus is finding the balance here of confronting the powers of the day, calling them out, naming that they are killing prophets, and Jesus is seeing their humanity, naming how he has longed to gather them like a mother hen gathers her chicks. There is this moving from naming what harm they are doing, and that still Jesus has compassion. Jesus wants to gather them in this maternal care, yet they refuse. As Rodney Clapp says, Jesus calls out their death feeling by name, yet he also sees them as barnyard chicks, lost in a storm, too afraid and too stubborn to find shelter under the shadow of mother hen's wings. Maybe it's because of one man holding so much power and destruction in our world right now, or that as a newbie to Idaho, my shock and horror at the bills being proposed, which you all are accustomed to. But as I read this, I realized Jesus is showing us a beautiful example of the both and reality of calling out destruction, naming harmful ways that power hurts those who have it and those who it is inflicted upon. Jesus is naming that clearly and still responding out of compassion and love, inviting us to ask, what is the deeper story? As we see Jesus' care and concern for those who refuse him, he may be asking, what is their story of pain? The generations of trauma that have led to the present. The systems and structures that lead to those who kill prophets and stone those sent to them, or who seek to take over another country while causing so much violence, pain, and harm, or the stories of pain, of fear that lead to some who are in state legislators to propose an anti-transgender bill that states any gender-affirming care to a minor is child abuse? Or what fear is there at the root to sue librarians who check out certain books to minors? What is the deeper pain or fear under the surface? So often, acts of power and control are rooted in pain and fear, rooted in deeper wounding, rooted in ways that systems and structures have told us what it means to be who we are. For example, I think of the ways that the system of patriarchy has told men and boys that emotions are not okay, except anger, and to be a man means to have control and power over a situation. And on the flip side, told women that they're not allowed to show anger and that there is this box they must fit into. These deep roots of the system of patriarchy have wounded all of us. In part, what Jesus is saying is that it doesn't have to be this way. We can heal from these stories we hold. We can imagine a different way to shape society. We can be gathered up under Christ's wings. Jesus wanted to gather up all those in Jerusalem like a mother hen gathering her chicks. This maternal care to gather us, to reassure us that we are safe, we are held in God's embrace, and thus we can move forward in love and compassion, and not out of fear. And yet, in these verses, Jesus is a mother hen with no chicks under her wings. Jesus is a bereft mother weeping over Jerusalem, as we'll hear just a few chapters later. It reminds me that 5 years ago, I sat in a seminary class with a professor who had been a therapist for many years. And it was just a few months after Trump had been elected. And she said about Trump, he is a very wounded person. He must have deep, deep trauma within him that he is pushing down and reacting out of. And that struck me and stays with me as I think about other leaders in our world who have caused such terror. How might Jesus be looking on them as a bereft mother? And how might we be invited to remember their humanity as well, and to do what at times feels so impossible, to pray for them, to do what Jesus is doing here, to very clearly name what they are doing as harm, to lament that they have refused to be gathered under Christ's wings, and to join in prayer of lament with Jesus. And to remember ways that we too have refused to be gathered under Jesus' wings. Ways that we react out of fear, out of pain, out of ego, out of trauma. May we be reminded that Jesus is always still longing for us, inviting us to come under her wings, to seek to move from fear to compassion. And knowing that this is part of who Jesus is, I find both comforting and convicting, as I try to remember that we each act out of a history, out of a story, as I seek to live into Jesus' call to love our neighbors, to pray for those who harm us, to love our enemies, which interestingly was the gospel reading just the week before the war started. I feel convicted to pray for my enemies, to pray that they too will be convicted, to pray that they can experience deep, deep healing and turn from their harmful ways. And to pray that I can shift my energy from anger and fear to compassion. To compassion for the humans being harmed. Compassion for the ways that patterns of trauma have shaped the trauma we see today. To remembering that approaching someone we disagree with anger won't change anything. We may be fueled by anger and fear, but if we shift our energy towards compassion, towards remembering we are all human, maybe helpful change could come. The Jesus who taught the words of loving our enemies is the same Jesus who expresses this maternal care of wanting to gather us all, to protect us under her wings, to embrace us, to embrace the fullness of who we each are, the stories of pain and trauma that we bring with us, and to remember that Jesus refused to be silenced by fear. Jesus names the death-dealing forces around him, responds out of maternal care and compassion, and continues to do the work he was called to do. Jesus longs still to gather us all under her wings. May you deeply know and feel that invitation to snuggle under the wings of a motherly Christ, wherever you find yourself these days. May it be so. Amen.